Episode 13. Welcome to Forever Break Podcast. Now, coming to you following an awkward airport pat-down, here are your hosts, Lianne and Corey.
Yeah, that TSA guy. His hands. That guy's certainly moisturized.
Very soft, yet very firm at the same time.
Cocoa butter, I'd say.
I wouldn't know personally, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, you will take our word for it, voiceover guy, because that's what we're paying you to do. Anyway, welcome to Forever Break Podcast. Leanne, how are you today?
I am fantastic. How are you today, Corey?
I'm absolutely fantastic myself, too.
Don't copy my adjective.
Hey, I can say whatever I want.
Think.
We are really excited about this episode. We are talking today about mindfulness and the media. We're going to be going over how does the media influence what we think about and how we feel about it, a little dive into social media and understanding it.
And are you open-minded? How being open to alternate perspectives can give you more peace of mind, and how we can distance ourselves from the ever-influencing media.
An interview with Mr. Chuck Jaffe, a longtime member of the media, and a podcast host himself. He hosts the podcast Money Life Show, which you can find on any of the podcast platforms. Really great interview. Hoping you guys are excited about that. So let's get started.
Quick quote.
Today's quote is with Money and Spending, and it's by Jay Shetty. Failures are only failures when we don't learn from them, because when we learn from them, they become lessons.
Beautiful.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
Under the magnifying glass.
So the media is interlaced with modern day living, from the news to the radio to discussions with friends. The immediate impact of the media is so apparent. But are you truly aware of where your opinions come from?
No.
No, not at all. I'm not surprised. After spending nearly 2 months watching American news, I'm kind of like, wow, you have to question everything and assume that nothing is real.
Yeah, it's almost more of like these staged debates. It's just really, really difficult to find trustworthy news sources here, and I'm sorry that you've had to be a witness to it.
You know what? Every experience is educational.
We can't turn on the TV and expect to get accurate information. We need to engage our critical mind. We really need to just understand all forms of bias and question the agenda just to make better informed, more well-rounded viewpoints.
Yeah, and I think it's something to definitely consider with that thought in mind is like the motives of why someone's giving you that information. So, big companies and corporations, they tend to pay off other companies to push a product or an image. So this can range from, we've talked about this in other episodes, pharmaceutical companies paying off the FDA, dairy companies paying the media to support and push the image of dairy being a health food when in fact it's the opposite. And even the NRA funding political parties to agree with their message. You can't believe everything you see on the media because it may or may not have been paid to present this message. You just kind of have to be aware that you might be hearing what the advertisers want you to hear. Which
is kind of the basis of advertising, but when it's spun and sold to you as news, it gets really blurry. So I think that that's something to just be very cognizant of as you're scanning your social media, as you're looking at any sort of thing. If you do a Google search for something, you're probably going to start seeing that in some of your Instagram, Facebook feeds and things like that down the road. It's pretty crazy stuff. Another form of media bias is prejudice. An example of this is the BBC coverage of Israel and the Middle East. It can range from mildly opinionated to outright factual inaccuracies and omission of critical facts.
Be critical, everybody. And that kind of brings us to social media, because obviously now we just have so much social media just thrust in our faces. We're constantly connected with the outside world. And social media actually began as a place to socialize, but now it's a medium for data collection, marketing, advertisement. Are you aware of how you're targeted through social media? I'm sure I'm not the only one that has experienced Instagram listening to my conversations.
We test this all the time.
Oh my God, it's so creepy.
Just kind of like randomly we'll start talking about a clothing item and then see if one of our feeds picks up on it. And we actually just introduced this to my dad, who's in his early 70s. And wakes up every morning and is like, Alexa, play Minneapolis or Minnesota Public Radio. And we're like, Dad, you understand that Alexa's listening.
And then now he started to add, and stop listening.
Yeah.
I don't think that's how it works, Barry. Well, but now in business, the most valuable asset is becoming big data. With this constant influence from our TVs to our phones, do we even know what we think anymore? Like an example of this is the Cambridge Analytica used a Facebook quiz to gather a wide range of data in order to target fence sitters and sway the result of the Brexit vote. But let's not talk about their involvement in the Trump campaign because we'll be here all day.
The good side of this is that we more often get to have an invisible sneak peek into the thoughts and lives of people who you don't agree with. I think Twitter's the perfect example. It's easy to get frustrated with what we see, but rather than get frustrated, can we open our eyes to alternate ideas to our own? I've never wanted to limit my diet, but after researching this podcast, we've decided to change our diets up or at least give it a shot and see how it goes. And this is just from looking at the other side of the argument in the media through documentaries, articles, expert opinions, and the lovely Lianne. Having another perspective can also be good. We need to analyze what's good for us on an ongoing basis, and that might be different for each person.
And yes, technically, we have a podcast. Technically, that's media. That means we have a prejudice and an agenda too. Go on, I just said it. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we have anything to hide. You should question who we are and what forms our opinions. Our executive producer.
Typical.
But I like to think we're very transparent with who we are. But, just question everything before blindly believing everything we say. I tend to do Lianneisms.
Yeah,
I make shit up.
She does. And, this is largely why we've included a wide range of expert interviews to add a level of trustworthiness and hopefully for us to learn something as well, because one thing that we find is that people can get tunnel vision. They get in this herd mentality where they just get into these echo chambers where they're just hearing the same opinions and ideas that they have over and over again. And I think it's really important to try and bust out of those and just get more perspective, which is kind of why we do this. We definitely want to say that our agenda involves helping you be more mindful.
Without using gun violence.
Yeah.
But distancing ourselves from the media, is it necessary and can it be done? I'm sure you've heard of friends who've deleted their Facebook accounts, etc., just because of being overwhelmed or taking up too much space in their lives. Some small steps that how you can achieve a healthy balance today would just be allocating only a set amount of time towards news sources. Again, I'm going to say particularly here in the US, just give yourself an hour a day or 2 hours a day, whether that be watching TV or scrolling through articles. It's just important to be aware of what is happening, but just don't overload yourself and mix your sources up. Educate yourself into having your own opinion, not one that's already made for you. Deliberately seeking opposite viewpoints to question your preconceived ideas is just going to make you a more rounded analytical individual.
Yeah, having a good idea of who is behind media outlets, and so getting an idea of why and where they're slanted. Examples of this are obviously Fox News is heavily towards more conservative viewpoints, while CNN, MSNBC lean more towards Democratic standpoints. Allocating a certain amount of time for social media, as Lianne said, I think that that's really important, especially when we're in a situation like we're in now where you turn on the news and it is just one news story over and over again and you just get beat down with it. I don't know about you guys, but I get really bored. So it's just been a really good time for us to do something like work on a podcast, practice a new skill, do something to do your self-expression. That's one of the things that led us to doing this season of the podcast, is just because it was like, let's start thinking about other things that we can do, because all that we're being surrounded with all the time is just this chaos of this pandemic, which is important to be knowledgeable of, but I think it's important to escape it as well.
Interesting interview.
So today we have the pleasure to speak with Chuck Jaffe. Chuck is a longtime member of the media, a current host of the podcast Money Life with Chuck Jaffe, and formerly the president of the Society for the Advancement of Business Editing and Writing. He has played the role of media critic many times in his career. While his primary focus is the business media, Chuck's longtime connection with the media makes him the perfect guest for our topic today. Hi Chuck, welcome. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I'm going to start you off with just a bit of a background question. So just give us a background on what exactly it is that you do within the media.
Well, I'm a syndicated financial columnist. So to the extent that newspapers still exist and that they run things that are not local, which is not a great extent anymore, I write columns that appear in papers across the country. Once upon a time, it was about 100 papers across the country. Now it's about 10 papers across the country. But I write a column on personal finance, money, and those things. And then I'm the host of Money Life with Chuck Jaffe, which is a daily 1-hour radio show and podcast all about money and more. And then historically, I've been very involved in the journalism world. I'm a past president of the Society of American Business Editors and Writers, which is now, because of the changes in journalism, the Society for the Advancement of Business Editing and Writing. We kept the acronym, changed what it means. But that has also put me in a place where I'm a frequent guest on various things to talk about media and media criticism and the rest. So whether it's because I'm involved in it or because I consume it or because I talk about it, I'm all over the media in different ways.
Let's go for the trifecta. Yeah. Good to pick the brains off.
Absolutely. So being that our season here is just kind of the overall arch of it is mindfulness. Just kind of curious, what do you personally do to be mindful of the media that you're exposed to? Just because obviously in today's age, there's so much out there.
Well, for me, it's trying to find trusted sources. And as a journalist, one of the things that has happened is that the way people source stories and the way people work stories is very different. So I don't want to sound like I'm 100 years old. I'm 57, but I have been doing this. I mean, I started working as a journalist when I was 14. You know, when I was first getting into business journalism, you lived and died on your contacts. And today, well, I think people don't care that much about it. You'll see all the time folks saying, oh, I'm looking for a source on this story, or I'm looking for somebody to give me quotes for this. And when I see that, I know that it's often bad journalism. So I'm mindful of the sources, of where the sources have potential conflicts of interest, and where the journalism is maybe meeting new standards, but it doesn't meet the classic standards that I want to see for feeling confident that the information is good. I mean, let's be perfectly honest. We can play games with statistics. I could show you COVID-19 statistics that would tell you the number of deaths are exaggerated, the number of deaths are underreported, or the number of deaths are reported accurately. And depending on your biases, not mine, because I'm not telling you which I believe, I'm just saying I could show you the numbers that play with the statistics that way. But depending on your biases, you'll say, oh, this is what I knew was happening. And, you know, that one is bogus. Okay. Well, I look for the fact that which information are you presenting, and is it at least balanced? You know, one of the things that happens is I love when I write a column, like I wrote one when the government did the stimulus package and everything else. And I write a column that's basically explaining, here's how it might affect you. Here's what you need to be prepared for, et cetera. I take no political sides in it because to me, I'm there to help people get the most for their money. What do I need to do? What do I need to be thinking about, et cetera? And yet my mail runs 50-50 and hot with half the people saying, why are you supporting what the Republicans are doing? And the other half going, you know, why are you so far on the left? Well, that tells me I've done my job right. But these days, what I'll also tell you is both whoever is writing me those notes, they hate me equally. Yeah. The ones who think I'm on the left will say all sorts of things about me being on the left. The ones who think I'm on the right will say that I'm on the right. And they both go away saying the media is biased and you're biased. But it's not my biases that are showing, it's theirs. So I look for media that I consider to be less biased, better sourced, and I question all the time, where's the information coming?
Yeah. See, I love that answer because, so obviously I'm not from the US, I'm from the UK. And since we've been back here, obviously all I've been seeing is the news. And one thing I pointed out to Corey was, wow, the news is like entertainment here. I feel like it doesn't matter what political side you're on. They're just always everyone seems to have an agenda. And doesn't matter whether it's left or right. Someone's always like talking the other side. And for me, from the UK, at least our news appears to be neutral. And would you disagree with this?
Well, even let's go back to that for a second. So, you know, as much as we went through the Revolutionary War to get away from England, what we actually have right now is a system that in some respects is trying to emulate England just that nobody recognizes it. In England, and correct me if I'm wrong, you, of course, have the party in power and you have the opposition. And the job of the opposition is to oppose. In other words, if the party in power says, what a lovely day, the sky is so blue, the opposition party goes, are you kidding me? The weather sucks. And that sky is distinctly grayish green. Right? Am I wrong?
No, that's just politics. Yeah.
Basically, the job is to oppose. Yeah. It is not, let's reach a compromise or what have you. Whereas in this country, it has always been, okay, we may disagree, but we'll come together to do it. And now, very much in this country, I mean, I think one of the biggest problems we have, and what I keep hoping we'll get out of the whole, we've all had to shelter at home, is a return to some measure of civility. Because it used to be, hey, you and I can look at the same thing. I mean, look, I deal in the money realm. If you and I, there's always somebody on the opposite end of your trade, right? So if you go into the market today and you say, hey, I want to buy this stock, there's somebody else going, hey, I want to sell this stock. That's disagreement. Disagreement makes a market, right? You want to buy it at a certain price. I want to sell it at a certain price. We come together and boom, there's your transaction. And we can do that respectfully. But right now in politics, we can't. It's just, oh, wait, you don't agree with what I agree with. You're obviously an idiot and I'm going to shout you down. And that is not good for anything. That is routinely bad for everybody because it's hard to have good government that way. In England, again, in England, we would understand that as, hey, you're just being the opposition. You're not necessarily an idiot. In this country, you don't agree with me, so you obviously are an idiot, and we don't know that it's the opposition.
And so what are some factors that listeners can assess to identify bias and trustworthiness within the media?
Well, I think you're always looking for what makes someone a source or an expert. Who are we quoting, and are they real experts? So I'm going to give this to you in the money realm, but you'll see how it has other ways. So if in the money realm, you'll have somebody who says, oh, I'm writing a piece about getting out of debt. And I need to go quote somebody as an expert on getting out of debt. And there's a group of financial folks who run blogs and podcasts and whatever. And they'll say, hey, I'm looking for somebody to talk to me. And all these people raise their hand because they all want the media exposure. They all want to push their podcasts or the courses that they have or whatever. So they all get out there. I'm an expert on getting out of debt. And when you look at their backgrounds, you find out, oh, they once had $50,000 in debt and they were able to get out of it, which does not make them an expert in getting out of debt. It makes them experienced in getting out of debt. They are also experienced in how to screw up your finances and rack up 50 grand in debt, right? I mean, they did both sides. There's a difference between experience and expertise.
Yep.
And I think we need to, as a general rule, look and try to see, is the source that we're getting our information from valid, and is the question valid? Start not just with the trustworthiness of the media, but are they doing things that are basically clickbait? Because clickbait's not usually the most trustworthy. Now, if you're digging in deeper, there are sites, very popular websites that I'm sure you see advertised all the time, where they say, hey, we'll help you find the best credit card issuer or the best bank account. What they're not telling you is they take advertising dollars from credit card companies. Now, does that mean that they don't ever give a good rating to somebody who won't advertise with them?
Oh, yeah.
No. But it's funny how the companies that do advertise with them never, ever get a bad score, right? So you want to look and try to go, wait, where is this information real and what's in the fine print? These days, people react when you want to talk about trustworthiness.
Yeah.
Read the headline and then read the actual story. Don't comment on something based on the headline that someone puts up. Now, I'm a journalist, so here's a little inside baseball for those who don't know. Columnists, and I am a nationally syndicated columnist, We do not write our own headlines. We don't.
I've just learned that.
We write it, and then whoever's using it writes a headline for the space that they have. Because in one newspaper, I might be across the page, and in another newspaper, I might be down the side of the page.
Yeah.
Now, we might offer suggestions, but we don't write it. And by the way, if we're actually employed, like when I was working at MarketWatch and that was my home base, well, the MarketWatch headline writers have all been to school for like, how do we do the things that make us score well on Google and on search engine optimization and all those other things. So every now and again, you get a headline and it's summing up, an 800-word article, and the headline says one thing and the article is much more reasoned. Well, that's not a big surprise. You can make a lot more reasoned arguments in 800 words than in 7, right? And so if you only react to the headline, and by the way, we know that, on an average story, people read about 19% of it. There's been studies done. And again, there are other studies that will say it's a little bit more. But so great, if I put a really smart point at the bottom of my column, that's really important before you call me an idiot or don't trust me, or also maybe it's really important that you know it if you're going to believe everything I say, you haven't read it. And I think so often people, if you want to know that you can trust it, you've got to try to look and go, hold it. Where's the flaws here? What's the issue, et cetera? And all that happens mostly is that people get knee jerk and react.
I want to try and talk to you a little bit about, because you have such a long history in it. And I think that obviously things through your lifetime and your profession and your time in media have changed so drastically. And I'm going to kind of combine two of our questions here because I think they go hand in hand. So I think that the idea of being first to print is something that is getting more and more relevant as we continue to get more into, people are putting things out on Twitter, on Facebook, and that kind of leads me into how has social media platforms changed the media industry with this kind of first to print mentality where it's like talking about what you said, we've got to have the headline, we've got to grab them. But I think a lot of people are just scrolling, seeing the headline, that's what they take out of it, and then they just keep going on. They hardly ever get into the meat and potatoes of it.
Well, yes, but that, by the way, the fact that they don't get to the meat and potatoes is actually why I would say that first to print pressure is less. First to print pressure in the old days was important because you really only got one chance to be first, and you were going to own that story for a length of time. Today, first to print pressure is only for a few minutes, because if you and I are battling over the same story and you come out with it first, but I come out with more details, or I've done different and better reporting, as the story comes out, I can become the definitive source. In the old days, you were the definitive source, not just because you were first, but because whoever was second by a long distance. So I think there's a little bit less. What you now have is how quickly can we react? In other words, you hear about a story and you have to say, let's talk about it right now. And you're doing it where the facts are in abeyance, where you're doing it on, it's interesting. You talk about social media. So when I was working at MarketWatch, one of my annual go-tos, actually still an annual go-to for me, is the Morningstar Investment Conference. Morningstar is a big research firm in Chicago, and they hold a great show where they bring in really smart folks. And at some point they said, well, hey, Chuck, could you cover the speech by Bill Gross, the greatest bond fund manager in the world at the time? And while you're at it, could you also live tweet it for us? And my answer was, no, I can't do both. And they said, why? And I said, if I live tweet, I'll be taking what he says and typing it as fast as I can, but I won't be taking it in. I won't be able to analyze it. If you want me to be a columnist trying to go, what's he really saying? None of it's going to sink in. Now, maybe that's because I'm a Luddite and I don't have those multitasking skills that everyone wants to brag about. Or maybe it's that those folks who multitask are, if you know the baseball term, they're utility infielders. A utility infielder is a guy who can play all positions But if it was good enough to start at any position, well, then he'd be called, your third baseman or your second baseman. Instead, he's called your utility infielder, right? So that's a, jack of all trades, but a master of none. And I'd rather be the master of my trades. And so I think the real thing is, we need to react and we need to fill time. And it's not just social media, but 24/7 media that makes it kind of crazy, gives lots of space to fill. And when you have space to fill, something's going to fill the space. It may not be something good.
And I mean, our generation now, we have so much more access to information than we ever have before. But censorship is still such a hot topic. And in your opinion, are there certain topics that should not be covered by the media for public consumption? Or do you think transparency is a way to keep these authorities accountable? And I'm thinking in terms of WikiLeaks and the distribution of classified military and government communications and things like that.
Let's first go back. And in spite of what you may have heard out of Washington recently, where they were talking about how things like Lysol and Clorox might be good disinfectants, sunshine is the best disinfectant. Okay. By the way, if we could shine sunshine where it needs to be, we would see all of our politicians' tax returns. That's why that's a big deal. And we would see other things. So do I believe that, and by the way, that's not a political statement. That to me, I think we should see it for everyone. I believe that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Let's go every place we can. So transparency is important. And I think it does keep authorities accountable. It is essential. And when you get away from it, the consequences are big and they are horrible. Now, does that mean we should be putting out classified military documents? No, I don't think we should. But I also don't think that things need to be classified necessarily as long as they are. I do think we have to weigh the public good. And what I can tell you is the guy who's on WikiLeaks is not necessarily thinking about all the consequences. They're thinking about what can I put out? And I think that there are consequences that we need to think about to our actions. Okay. Now let's take a look and I'll again go back to a finance example. I wrote a column called The Stupid Investment of the Week for 10 years. And the very first stupid investment of the week was investment notes from a company called American Business Financial Services. Now, these had been advertised in newspapers all across the country. And they were basically, here's a way to invest. It's kind of like buying a bond, and you'll get a much better return than you would from the market or the bond market, et cetera. And they're so safe. But when you read the paperwork on this particular investment, you realized, if you knew where to look, that this was a legal Ponzi scheme. It literally said in their documents, if we can't sell more, we probably can't pay you back. So in other words, I need the next guy to buy this so I can pay the last guy back, and I need the next guy to buy after you so I can pay you back. That, my friends, is a Ponzi scheme. Yet it had passed regulatory approvals and everything else. Now, these guys had millions of dollars. And a funny thing's going to happen when you write a piece that says this is not just the stupid investment of the week. It is by definition, a Ponzi scheme that somehow regulators approve.
Yeah, I guess because they have it in the writing, right?
Everybody who's got money in there. Yeah, absolutely. But everyone who's got money in those investments is about to lose whatever they've got. Because once you question it, especially in today's world, well, now there'll be a Google search. And the person who was going to be the next one to put in money searches, finds my piece and goes, wait, even if this guy's wrong, I don't think I want to take this chance.
All
right?
trust is gone.
So I saved all the people who hadn't put money in. I saved them from buying a terrible investment. Yet my reporting was going to guarantee that certain people who held it could potentially lose however much money they had in there. So you better understand that there are consequences to your work. Now, mind you, again, I had people who wrote me and thanked me for saving them. And I had people who wrote me and called me every name in the book because obviously they had been doing well with it. How could I not see that this was the best thing out there? Well, I saw that it wouldn't stay the best thing out there. So again, and that's just an example of consumer-oriented journalism. It's much different when you start to talk about life or death, when you start to talk about who's not safe anymore or who can use things. So there are things that I don't think we shouldn't be reporting on, but I think we should be reporting on them carefully. And in a world where there is much less editing, where it is much easier to hit send and put it out there and potentially have an audience, I think that is the bigger issue. And it's not so much censorship. Censorship is never good, but it's more just, who is going to be the gatekeepers? And having gatekeepers is still important. And we see that a lot in social media.
I'm curious about just kind of a little bit more. I love when you talk about what you're doing specifically. And we really liked a statement on your site that says that your style of journalistic history has been comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable, which is really what you just gave us a great example of. I mean, are you kind of just like a Batman or Robin Hood of the financial world? Are you taken and then given to the people who need it?
Well, no, but that comment comes from H.L. Mencken, famous newspaper editor, who said the role of the media is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. Now, I'm going to tell you this, you'll like this example. We're going to get way away from business and finance, but we're going to go back to social media. My favorite example ever of how social media can affect change and be interesting involved my oldest daughter. Now, she's now 28. And when she went to college, she went to a little school called DeSales University. It's on the other side of the mountain from Lehigh University in eastern Pennsylvania. And it was named for St. Francis of DeSales. So it's a Catholic denominational school, although my daughter's not Catholic, and, named for St. Francis of DeSales. So when my daughter got to school, she was 19. She's now 28. So, this is 9 years ago, 18, 19. She and a friend made a Twitter handle at Frank of DeSales. And they used a picture of St. Francis. And they made the bio 3 words: don't, period, have, period, sex, period. That was their bio. And the friend transferred, left after the first semester. And they really didn't know what they had. But they now had, basically the Twitter handle of the guy that the school was named for. And my daughter tweeted with the sensibilities sometimes of a post-teenage girl and sometimes with the sensibilities of a 65-year-old filthy old crank. She kind of adopted at times the personality of St. Francis from different statues that he was on campus, right? What you could see and what have you. And my daughter is a rules kid. She loves rules and structure and the rule books. And she's the kind of kid who would read the student handbook and then go, hey, they just opened unisex bathrooms in this place. How's that possible when men and women are not allowed to be in rooms with closed doors, according to this article of our thing? Or they'd put up a new statue and they would have a typo in one of the plaques and she would single it out. Or she would say things like, make sure you come to the dining hall for free tacos on Cinco de Mayo because we wouldn't want our one Mexican student to feel singled out today. Right? Which was all kind of really good commentary on the campus. And she was comforting the afflicted, the students. How bad is the food? How dumb is the administration? And afflicting the comfortable. It's a great use of Twitter. Now, when she left, she had already by the time she finished, she had more followers than they had students. She had followers from the administration and whatever else and what have you. And it was a great use of social media. And it made a difference, kind of helped the students, and it didn't really harm the administration, but whatever. should have more of that kind of stuff on Twitter and less, let me tell you about the Diet Coke that I just picked up. Or, I don't need to know how long the line was at your Starbucks. It's just not valuable information to me. So, I think social media has changed a bunch of things, but it can still be the right thing. Social media is still media. And if it's done in media ways, you can still comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And as for me, I wouldn't say I'm like a Batman or a Robin Hood or whatever. I would say that I've tried to be, throughout my career, the consumer or the investor's proxy in the financial world. In other words, I would like to believe I know the things or have learned the things or have access to the expertise that you may not have access to. So, when we were pointing out the stupid investment of the week, we never called investors stupid. But, you should know that equity indexed annuities, they're bad investments almost 100% of the time. Yet they are incredibly popular in this country. And I can rid you of that notion pretty quickly just by showing you what goes into them and how they, work or don't work, depending on how you want to look at it. So that's really more my job. I'm not trying to, rob the rich and give the poor. I am trying to make sure that you are armed, that somebody has to read that prospectus to know that that thing that was advertised in your newspaper, it's bogus.
Well, we appreciate that because I've tried to read some prospecti and it is not an easy venture.
Nope, definitely not.
Well, let's move on to our next question. So we both love the power in seeing both sides of an argument. I think there's definitely, I think it's just so important to understand both sides and just to educate yourself accordingly. So how difficult is it in the journalistic world to keep an open mind and put your personal opinions and beliefs secondary?
Well, I don't find it difficult at all because I'm intellectually curious. I also tend to believe that, have you ever been to Boston?
No, I haven't.
No.
Okay. Well, if you may have heard about Boston drivers. Okay. Boston drivers are particularly difficult, right? So if you are here, if I wanted to teach my kids how to drive in Boston, I would have said, never use your blinkers. You know why? Because you don't want the enemy to know what you're thinking.
Wow, it's so scary.
Right?
It's a cold, dark world out there.
To me, I want to know what the other guy's thinking. I want to know the other side of the argument. As a journalist, even if I want to be biased, even if I want to show what I know, I find it better to know both sides because I can frequently counter. There are plenty of times where you'll be writing something. You go, I can hear what somebody's going to say. As I'm writing this thing, I can hear what my critics are going to say. And if they get you on substance, that's bad. One of the things that happens is that because we're all out there and I'm not thin, I am in shape because we learned in kindergarten that round is a shape. So I'm in shape, but I'm not thin. So when somebody dislikes, like when I would write stupid investment of the week, if you want to attack me because I'm heavy, well, I can lose weight, but you're not going to get any smarter and your argument's not going to get any better. And, to me, the, hey, you're fat. Okay, cool. Those are easy to discount. Got it. No problem. You've shown where you are intellectually. But when somebody comes in and goes, wait, hold it. Your research was bad, or you didn't see this, or you haven't seen that. That's where I think a good journalist wants to know both sides. I talked a little bit at the beginning about how folks will seek out help and they'll say, oh, I need somebody, I'm looking for somebody to do this on this story. Well, frequently there are writers who will say, I'm looking for a quote to add to a story about whatever I'm working on. And they'll put a Google document together and they'll invite different people to come in and submit a quote. It is the worst form of journalism. Why? Because they've shut themselves off to learning things. I've had times where I'm listening to this, reading somebody saying this, and I'm like, you don't actually understand the story that you're writing. You think the story is the fork on the road to the left, but the more interesting one in this story is the fork on the road to the right. Now, if I tell you that, well, you don't have anything gathered to go to the right, so you're not, and I don't mean politically right, I'm just talking about two different directions on the same story, but you don't have the wherewithal to go in that direction because you haven't talked to anybody about it. You've got a deadline, it's approaching, you're looking for a story, a quote that fits your story. In other words, let me do the narrative, and then I'll add a little credibility by having somebody who enhances my narrative. I'd rather go the other way. I'd rather say, hey, what do you think the story is here? And then when you give me that story, I go, oh, it is in the direction I thought it was going to be, or maybe it isn't. So to me, I find it, I'm always looking at all sides of the argument. Is it difficult? No, but that's because I don't let folks influence me. I'll give you one more example that just occurred. We're talking the last week of April. On my show earlier this week, I had a guy who works for a firm that, oh, by the way, correctly forecast the market crash of 1987. They've been doing this for a long time. And he and I were talking about, everybody thinks, oh, the market tanks, you buy on the dips, et cetera. And he goes, you might want to buy, but you shouldn't think of what you're doing now as a low risk buying opportunity. In other words, hey, the market bangs it all down. I just go scoop up a little everything because it's all going to go back up and it's just low risk to buy when the market's been beaten up. So he's like, nope, it's high risk. It's really difficult. The next day, I have a woman on who is the founder of a small mutual fund company and one of the brightest minds in the investing world. And she says, are you kidding me? There are some really, really good low risk investment opportunities. But oh, by the way, you're going to be going where the blood is running in the streets. Go buy the cruise lines. Go buy the airlines. Go buy the hotel companies if they're the best ones and their balance sheet is spectacular. Cruise lines that, if they didn't make a penny for 2 years, still have a good balance sheet. And those things exist. Well, okay. One person is looking at the market going, nothing low risk. The other one's saying, yeah, it's low risk. You just have to go where, by the way, if I asked you, and I don't believe you guys are, particularly savvy investors, you haven't said anything about it. If I asked you, what would you think like the riskiest business you could get into right about now would be? You'd probably tell me, how about cruise lines?
Yeah.
Or hotels, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So again, it's how do you look at risk? It's important that you understand all sides. Now, if you then want to invest, you have to have the courage of your convictions. And at that point, you're going to rely on which of those people do you trust, which made the most sense to you, what does the rest of your research show, and all the rest of that. So if you don't keep an open mind, you're shutting things off. And when that happens, well, at some point, you're going to be on the wrong side of the equation. So to me, it's easy. And in a journalistic world, it kind of becomes, don't care who hates you. I'm an equal opportunity offender. So when I wrote that piece on the stimulus stuff and half the folks came out and were assailing me as being biased on the left and the other half assailed me as being biased on the right, I thought, wow, did my job well today, didn't I?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, split the middle. I think that's perfect in the terms of just kind of keeping an open mind. And we've got one more question for you, and I think that this is maybe our most important question because it's about healthy habits. And so for our audience, and just for somebody who's been in the media for so long, what are some healthy habits that you would recommend people practice to help stay informed, but at the same time, it's ever and ever more important to unplug and make sure that you actually get yourself present in the moment and actively living their lives without necessarily having it be all online all the time. And I'm just kind of wondering, from someone who's obviously gone through that transition in the media of, waking up and getting your newspaper and having a cup of coffee and reading it and getting your news that way versus I can just be doing anything, hop on my phone and start looking at articles. What is the best piece of advice you can give for people in today's world?
I do think that unplugging is important. I do think that whether it's in the media or in life, let's not confuse what's urgent with what's important. So we have, for me, I have daily deadlines. Those daily deadlines are urgent, but the things that I most want to get done, well, they may not involve those daily things. I have a day-to-day show to put out. Sometimes I'm trying to write stuff or work on stuff that has bigger impacts and longer shelf life or whatever. So I think at all times, remember what's important. And if you start to think about your life and you think about what's important, okay, your health is important. Your family is important. Those sorts of things, your ability to enjoy it. Cause nobody's going to get to the end of their life. If God forbid anybody gets a terminal diagnosis today, chances are pretty good that they're not going to get that diagnosis and go, damn it, there was so much more work I wanted to get done.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
So I really wish I could have worked a few more hours every day of my life and even folks who really love their work like I do. It's not about that. You want to try to find the right thing. So I think some of it is find the priorities. And it's really easy in a 24/7 news environment to go find something else or whatever. Look, if you need to get out and get your rage off by picking on somebody on Facebook or whatever, because they totally take the opposite side, knock yourself out. Okay. It's going to happen. But ultimately, most of this stuff is smoothed out in the long run. And that's what you want to keep in mind. I have lived through Black Monday of 1987. I'm old enough to have done that, which for any investor alive today, it's the worst day in stock market history in their lifetime. Because there's nobody alive today who was investing when the market crashed in 1929. I know that was only 91 years ago, but you'd have to be 120 right now. Because you remember, you had to be basically, or 110, you had to be 19 years old to be investing in securities. So, to be an adult and investing in 1929, you'd be 110 right now. So nobody alive who was investing then. So Black Monday, when the market lost 22% in a single day, right? Worst day.
An adult, yeah.
For as much as people today were like, oh, the market's going down 1%, 2%. Do I want to get out or what have you? No one I know who was in the market and couldn't get out of it, even if they wanted to, on Black Monday, which was now, 30 plus years ago, 33 years ago, 87. Yeah. 33 years ago. If you were in your 30s, then you're not age 65 now going, man, if I just hadn't been in the market on Black Monday, I'd be able to retire right now. But now I have to work 3 extra years because I was in the market then. Over time, guess what? Black Monday was just another day. If you position properly, whether it's your money or your life, pretty much everything is just going to be, not that big a deal. In the minute, there's a reason why we say, years are fast, but days are long. Years are short and days are long, right? Every day it's like, oh, I got all this other stuff to get to. And then you go, wait, where'd the year go? Well, that's what's happening. And by the way, you can see some of that right now. I don't know you personally, but I'm willing to bet that somewhere in your house, you've got something. It's a pile. It's a pack of old pictures. It's whatever you've got that you've accumulated where you've been saying, hey, if I just had a little bit more time at home, I would get through this stuff. Have you got one of those?
What's yours, Corey?
I've got a storage unit.
Have you gotten through it while you've had more time at home?
No.
Okay. And the fact is that for the vast majority of people, they've got something in their house. Oh, I wanted to go through those pictures. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. And I would do it if I just had more time at home. When I've got more time at home and you haven't done it. And that means the problem's not time. The problem is you and your priorities. And I think that's what we all need to remember is that, you can decide that you're going to I've got a friend of mine who is constantly on social media, and I love reading some of the things that he finds because he does find some really interesting stuff. But seriously, if he asked me for life advice, I'd be like, dude, stop, get a life. Like, hey, you know all the people who I play volleyball with. Why aren't you coming to play volleyball and have a drink on a Thursday night?
Stop doing what you're doing and just
when we're entitled to do it and the beaches are open and whatever. And obviously not now, but why aren't you doing that? Instead, you're basically rage tweeting and whatever. Stop that. We don't need that rage. That's not good for anybody. So to me, that's what you want. Focus on what's important. Or, there's a Venn diagram where, there's things that matter and there's things that you can control. And there's a very small overlap where it's something that matters and that you can control. That's a good place to focus to. Focus on the important stuff, not the urgent. Focus on the things that matter that you also can control.
Yeah. Nice.
That's really good, Chuck. That's good. That's just good sound advice for anybody in pretty much any situation, because if you can't control it, why are you wasting your energy on it? And I will say that you pinned us. We are not that savvy of investors yet, but I'm a new recent subscriber to your podcast, so I hope to be. So pressure's on you now.
Maybe you'll get an email from us next week.
Well, and what I'll tell you is this. I will give your audience just a quick thing on my show, not to plug it too much. But we do an hour of financial talk a day. Now, it is often issue and market oriented. So you may find if you like market talk, you don't have to be necessarily an investor or a big investor, because you may like the market talk or the authors that we speak with or the economists or what have you. But what I also think of about my show is that there are plenty of shows out there that, if your big issue is not, I need to invest, your issue is, I need to get out of debt. There are plenty of good shows that are going to help you. And they're not necessarily my show, but my show is what you're going to graduate to. So if you find that my show is not necessarily over your head, but if you go, wait, it doesn't apply to me because I need to get to where I've got more to invest, or I need to get out of debt before I can really invest, then go to those others. And when you're done, we'll still be there for you, because we just celebrated our 8th anniversary.
Oh, that's awesome. Congrats.
And it's moneylifeshow.com on any of your favorite podcast platforms. Money Life with Chuck Jeff.
Fantastic.
So hear that, everybody? If you want to be a money whiz, head that way, and hopefully Chuck will give us all some good investing advice.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time, Chuck. It's so appreciative to talk to somebody who just has been around it for so long and just has such a good open perspective, and it's not something where you feel like you've got to be pushing one way or another, and that's awesome in today's world. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope to talk to you again someday.
I look forward to that conversation. Thanks for having me, guys.
Interview digestion.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Lianne, give me a couple things that you just pulled out of that, because he had a lot to say in terms of his expertise, which is the financial section, but I also think that just his overall experience being in the media since the early 80s has given him a very big and just vast lifetime of an experience. One of the most important takeaways that I had from it was when he was talking about transparency and just how important he really views that is, but it needs to be done with some caution. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree with what he said, because, I mean, transparency is great, but we all know that there's some people that can't quite handle the truth, or I think from our kind of cultures, we're from a very entitled country. Both of us are from very entitled countries, and you can even see that in the whole protesting for the quarantine and attacking nurses and doctors, things like that. And I just feel like, obviously, transparency is amazing, but there just needs to be some kind of, like you said, a gatekeeper, someone who isn't morally inept, isn't able to be paid off to sway to this. And I think that's something that's so hard. Do
you find these differences because you've been exposed to our media, you're welcome, for the last couple of months here, give me some of the differences that you think is going on between the media that you've grown up with and what you've been seeing here? Yeah, because I mean, obviously I think that our media is just as messed up. I just think that it's harder to get that on the surface. So, just sitting down and watching the news,
in the UK or anywhere else in the world, you kind of sit down and you watch the news and you're fed information, but the hosts don't go off and insult the Prime Minister, or they don't go off and insult someone else on a different political party. That would be a whole different show. That's not news. That would be a talk show, or that would be a debate or a discussion.
And they kind of keep it a little bit more neutral.
Exactly. That's it completely.
But there's obviously biased news channels and these kind of debate shows and stuff going on in England as well.
Exactly. So if you go onto an actual debate show, then there are names that are kind of like skipping out my head because it's been so long I've been there. But, that's where you have two sides and experts and, scholars from different sides that have different points. And they come in and they discuss their points and they debate their points. But that is not presented as news. News is like very much, here's the information, moving on to the next story.
Yeah.
Here's the information, moving on to the next story. But I will say, with having Chuck on, how amazing is it that one of our guests was threatened to be sued by a president?
Yeah.
Even though he wasn't president at the time. But wow.
It seemed like it was one of his proudest achievements.
Oh my God, I'm proud of him. But I think that's something that's really refreshing to hear as well. Just everything that Chuck kind of covered there. And, he gave us a lot of information, particularly in the financial district of investing and stuff. But that there are honest, genuine people out there, and there are people that really want to, give out the truth, and they really want to, they don't care. They're like, no, this is how it should be done, which I think is amazing to see and hear that those people do exist in the media.
Yeah. In short, find yourself a journalist who, like Chuck, wants to get equal parts positive and negative feedback from both sides, because then he feels like he's doing his job right, and also doesn't go and look at how many clicks their article might have had, doesn't think about how many people are reading it, just wants to write it because it's an important story that they feel like should get out there. After they write it and it's out there, whatever happens,
it's
happens.
It's not about the ego.
Exactly.
It's not about the ego.
Take it further.
So if you do want to learn a little bit more about all of this stuff within the media, we have some really great tips. One of the best documentaries that I've seen in the recent past is called The Great Hack, which is available on Netflix. It's kind of just like a breakdown of the company Cambridge Analytica and how our data from social media has been used to have an effect on elections in recent history.
And I'm a movie nerd and I love to watch things to learn. But the movie The Social Network, it's based on true story and it's fiction, but it's about the background story, albeit dramatized, of Facebook. That's available on Netflix, but it just covers a lot of real-time or like real-life stories that happened during that time.
Yeah. The Post is another good movie. It's about the Washington Post publishing classified documents relating to the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, also on Netflix.
And a little bit of literature to end on. You can check out some more information about how social media is an impact on our lives with the book 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. And we will include this list in our show notes so you guys don't have to remember what we just said. Thank you for joining us on this endeavour to learn more about the media. It's definitely very interesting to hear some insider scoop from Chuck there. If you are interested in learning any more about business and finance, make sure you check out Chuck's podcast, Money Life Show. And there's also a website for the show, which is moneylifeshow.com.
And join us on the next episode, number 14, where we will be exploring money and spending and just why we seem to love spending so much, Lianne.
Okay.
We are going to be joined by author and saving extraordinaire Kel Gallivan, who has made some really inspirational lifestyle changes and saved her family's income by nearly 27,500 euros in 1 year. As always, we appreciate your support, and we hope that you tune in for the next one. Handing it over to voiceover guy.
No problem. Subscribe now to the Forever Break podcast on your favorite platform: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. If you enjoyed this episode, help us out and leave a 5-star review. And remember, you can find all the juicy details discussed in this episode in the show notes at foreverbreak.com/podcast.